The mirror in the cramped boarding house reflected back everything Susannah Wells had spent 23 years trying to ignore. Her height towering above the wooden frame as she bent awkwardly to glimpse her face. At 6 feet and 2 inches, she stood taller than most men in Mojave, California, and they never let her forget it. The year was 1882, and while the railroad had brought progress and opportunity to the Mojave Desert, it had brought her nothing but disappointment and ridicule. She straightened up, her spine aching from the constant hunching she did throughout the day at the general store where she worked. The owner, a portly man named Mr. Henderson, had hired her out of desperation when no one else would take the job for such meager wages. But even he made comments about her unfortunate stature when he thought she could not hear. Susannah tied her long auburn hair back with a fraying ribbon, one of the few luxuries she allowed herself. Her face was pleasant enough, with soft green eyes and a smattering of freckles across her nose, but no man ever looked at her face long enough to notice. Their eyes always traveled upward, measuring, calculating, finding her lacking in the only way society deemed important for a woman to be docile, small, and manageable. The boarding house stairs creaked beneath her feet as she descended for breakfast. Mrs. Kelly, the proprietor, had already set out the morning meal, thin porridge and weak coffee that barely sustained the dozen residents who called this establishment home. Susannah took her usual seat at the far end of the long table, away from the other boarders who whispered and snickered behind their hands. "Lord have mercy," a woman named Catherine said loudly enough for everyone to hear. "It is a wonder the chair does not collapse under all that length." Like trying to fold up a daddy long-legged spider. Laughter erupted around the table. Susannah kept her eyes on her bowl, spooning the tasteless porridge into her mouth with mechanical precision. She had learned long ago that reacting only encouraged them. "I heard Tom Parker tried courting her last year," another woman chimed in. "Took one walk with her and never came back. Said it felt like taking his mother to the church social." More laughter. Susannah swallowed her food and stood, leaving half her portion uneaten. The walk to Henderson's general store took 15 minutes through the dusty streets of Mojave, past the saloon where rough men gathered even at this early hour, past the blacksmith shop, where the ring of hammer on anvil had already begun, past the small church where Reverend Thompson preached about God's perfect design every Sunday while parishioners wondered what divine plan included a woman built like a telephone pole. The store smelled of leather and tobacco, coffee beans and lye soap. Mr. Henderson was already arranging canned goods on the shelves, his movements brisk despite his considerable girth. "Morning, Miss Wells," he said without looking at her. "We got a shipment coming in today from the rail yard. I will need you to help unload it." She nodded and tied her apron around her waist, preparing for another day of backbreaking labor that paid barely enough to cover her room and board. The bell above the door chimed periodically as customers filtered in, most of them ignoring her completely, unless they needed something from a high shelf, which she could reach without the wooden ladder Mr. Henderson required. It was nearly noon when Nathan Mitchell walked through the door, and Susannah felt something shift in the air, like the moment before a summer storm breaks across the desert. He stood at least 6 feet 5 inches tall, with broad shoulders that filled the doorframe and a presence that made the spacious store suddenly feel smaller. Dark hair fell across his forehead beneath a dusty cowboy hat, and his eyes, sharp and intelligent, scanned the interior with the assessing gaze of someone accustomed to evaluating situations quickly. "Help you, sir?" Mr. Henderson scurried forward, always eager to please a customer who looked like he might actually have money to spend. "Need supplies," Nathan said, his voice a deep rumble that reminded Susannah of distant thunder. "I am starting a ranch about 10 miles northeast of here. Going to need regular shipments of feed, tools, building materials." Mr. Henderson's eyes lit up at the prospect of a wealthy, steady customer. Of course. We can arrange all of that. Miss Wells, come take Mr. Mitchell's list." Susannah approached with her usual slight stoop, a habit so ingrained she barely noticed it anymore. She pulled a pencil and paper from her apron pocket, keeping her eyes lowered respectfully. "Go ahead, sir," she said quietly. There was a pause, long enough that she finally looked up. Nathan was staring at her with an expression she could not quite decipher. Not mockery, not pity, but something else entirely. Something that made her pulse quicken inexplicably. "You can stand up straight," he said gently. "No need to make yourself smaller." The words hit her like a physical blow, unexpected and strangely painful. She straightened instinctively, bringing herself to her full height, and found herself looking almost directly into his eyes. Almost, because he still had a few inches on her, but the difference was so slight compared to every other man she had ever encountered that it took her breath away. "That is better," he said with a slight smile that softened his weathered features. "Now, I am going to need about 200 pounds of oats, same of corn, a dozen fence posts, 3 spools of barbed wire, and whatever you recommend for starting a garden in this climate." She wrote everything down with shaking hands, hyper-aware of his proximity and the strange way he kept looking at her, as if truly seeing her rather than just her height. When she finished, he took the list and scanned it with a nod of approval. "You have good handwriting," he observed. "Neat and clear. I appreciate that." "Thank you, sir," she managed, her voice barely above a whisper. "Name is Nathan Mitchell," he said, extending a hand, "but most folks just call me Nate." She hesitated before placing her hand in his, expecting the usual limp grip men gave women as if they might break from a proper handshake. Instead, he grasped her hand firmly, respectfully, the way he might shake hands with another man. "Susannah Wells," she replied. "Pleasure to meet you, Miss Wells." He held her hand a moment longer than strictly necessary before releasing it. "I will be back tomorrow to pick up that order. Maybe you could help me load it. You look like you are strong enough to be useful, and I mean that as the compliment it is." Before she could respond, he tipped his hat and strode out of the store, leaving her standing there with her heart hammering against her ribs for reasons she could not fully explain. "Well, that was peculiar," Mr. Henderson muttered, eyeing her suspiciously as if she had somehow arranged the entire interaction. "Get back to work, Miss Wells. That order will not prepare itself." She spent the afternoon gathering Nathan Mitchell's supplies, her mind replaying every moment of their brief conversation. No man had ever told her to stand up straight, had ever acknowledged her strength as something positive rather than unfeminine and wrong. She caught herself smiling as she stacked bags of feed, then quickly suppressed it when Mr. Henderson walked past. That evening at the boarding house, Catherine and her cronies were in particularly vicious form. Someone had seen Susannah talking to the handsome new rancher, and speculation ran wild about what a man like that could possibly want with a woman like her. "Probably thought she was another man," Catherine said with a cruel laugh. "Easy mistake to make from behind." "Maybe he needs a farmhand and figures she is strong as an ox," another suggested. "Too ugly to be worth marrying, too tall to ignore. That is our Susannah," Catherine concluded, and the table dissolved into giggles. Susannah lay awake that night in her small room, staring at the ceiling while moonlight filtered through the thin curtains. She thought about Nathan Mitchell's eyes, the way they had looked at her without that usual flicker of discomfort or disgust. She thought about his words, telling her to stand straight to take up the space her body naturally occupied. She thought about his hand, strong and warm around hers, treating her like an equal rather than a curiosity. It meant nothing, she told herself firmly. He was simply a polite man, a rarity in this harsh town but not a miracle. Tomorrow he would collect his supplies and she would likely never see him again except in passing. She would be a fool to imagine anything else. But when sleep finally claimed her, she dreamed of standing tall beside someone who did not make her feel like a mistake of nature. And she woke with tears on her cheeks that she could not fully explain. True to his word, Nathan appeared at the store the next morning with a sturdy wagon hitched to 2 powerful horses. Susannah had already loaded most of his supplies onto a hand cart, and she wheeled it outside before he could even dismount. "Efficient," he commented, hopping down from the wagon seat. "I like that in a person." Together they loaded the supplies, working in companionable silence. Susannah was acutely aware of the townspeople watching, whispers following them like flies. She tried to ignore it, but when Nathan reached for the same bag of feed she did and their hands brushed, she flinched away as if burned. He noticed, of course. He seemed to notice everything. "People here treat you poorly," he said quietly, loading the last of the fence posts. It was not a question. "I am used to it," she replied, not meeting his eyes. "That does not make it right." He brushed dust from his hands and leaned against the wagon, studying her thoughtfully. "How long have you worked here?" 3 years since I came to Mojave. "Where were you before?" "Sacramento. My parents died of typhoid fever and I had no other family. I moved here hoping to find work, maybe start fresh somewhere no one knew me." She laughed bitterly. "That was a foolish dream." "Why foolish?" She gestured at herself, at her height, at the people still watching them from across the street. "Because wherever I go, I am still this, still too much of everything a woman should not be." Nathan was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "My ranch needs help. Building corrals, tending animals, maintaining equipment. It is hard work, and I can only pay modest wages to start, but it includes room and board in the ranch house. Separate quarters, of course, everything proper and respectable. I could use someone strong and reliable." Susannah's head snapped up, certain she had misheard. "You are offering me a job." "I am offering you an opportunity," he corrected. "A chance to do meaningful work, to be valued for your capabilities rather than judged for your appearance. The ranch is isolated, just me and a couple of hired hands who come in from town when I need extra help. Peaceful, quiet, no one to whisper behind your back." It sounded too good to be true, which meant it probably was. Susannah had learned to be suspicious of kindness, particularly from men. "Why would you do this?" she asked bluntly. "You do not know me. I could be lazy or incompetent or a thief. Are you any of those things?" "No." "Then I am willing to take the chance if you are." He straightened, adjusting his hat. "Think about it. I will be back in 3 days for another supply run. If you are interested, have your things packed and ready. If not, no hard feelings." He climbed back onto the wagon and drove away, leaving Susannah standing in the dusty street with her mind reeling. The next 3 days passed in a blur of agonizing indecision. The rational part of her brain insisted this was dangerous, that accepting a job living on an isolated ranch with a strange man was exactly the sort of foolishness young women were warned against. But another part of her, the part that was exhausted from years of mockery and loneliness, whispered that this might be her only chance at something different, something better. She made the mistake of mentioning the offer to Catherine at dinner the second night. A ranch hand. Catherine shrieked with laughter. "Oh, that is perfect. He does think you are a man. Wait until he figures out his mistake. Or maybe he knows exactly what he is getting," another boarder suggested with a leer. Isolated ranch, unmarried woman, no one around to hear if she screams. We all know what men really want. That is disgusting, Susannah snapped, her temper finally breaking. Not every man is a predator, and not every woman is helpless prey. No, but every woman should have enough sense not to go live alone with a strange man, Catherine retorted. Then again, you are so desperate for attention you probably see this as your only chance to get any. How pathetic. Susannah stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. I would rather be pathetic and hopeful than cruel and small-minded. At least I am not so insecure that I need to tear others down to feel better about myself. She left the dining room to shocked silence, her heart pounding. Back in her room, she pulled her battered trunk from under the bed and began to pack. She owned pitifully little, just a few dresses, a spare pair of boots, some undergarments, and a Bible her mother had given her years ago. Everything fit easily into the small trunk with room to spare. When Nathan Mitchell pulled up in his wagon 3 days later, Susannah was waiting outside the boarding house with her trunk at her feet. She wore her best dress, a simple blue calico that Mrs. Kelly had given her in lieu of wages when the boarding house fell on hard times, and she had pinned her hair back neatly. She stood at her full height, chin raised, refusing to hunch even though she could see curtains twitching as the other boarders watched. Nathan's face broke into a genuine smile when he saw her. He hopped down from the wagon and lifted her trunk as if it weighed nothing, securing it in the back. "You came," he said, and she could hear the pleasure in his voice. "I did," she confirmed. "Though I should warn you, I have never worked on a ranch before. I might be terrible at it." "Then you will learn," he said simply, offering his hand to help her up onto the wagon seat. "Everyone starts somewhere." As they drove out of Mojave, leaving behind the only life Susannah had known in California, she felt a strange mixture of terror and exhilaration. The desert stretched out endlessly on all sides, harsh and beautiful, dotted with Joshua trees and sage brush. Mountains rose in the distance, their peaks still dusted with snow despite the warming spring weather. "Tell me about your ranch," she said, needing to fill the silence with something other than her own racing thoughts. "It is small right now," Nathan admitted. "I have about 200 acres, planning to run cattle once I get the infrastructure built. There is a main house, needs some work but it is solid. A barn, a well with good water. I bought the property 6 months ago from a prospector who gave up looking for silver and decided to try his luck elsewhere. And you are building it alone, mostly. I have some money saved from my years working cattle drives, but not enough to hire a full crew. That is why I need help, someone willing to work hard in exchange for a stake in something real." "A stake?" Susannah looked at him sharply. "You said wages." "I said modest wages," Nathan corrected, guiding the horses around a particularly rough section of road. "But I also believe in rewarding loyalty and hard work. Help me build this ranch into something successful, and you will share in that success. I am not looking for a servant, Miss Wells. I am looking for a partner." The word hung in the air between them, loaded with implications neither of them addressed directly. Susannah turned her attention back to the landscape, her hands folded tightly in her lap. They rode in silence for another hour before the ranch came into view, a collection of weathered buildings nestled against a hillside where a natural spring provided water year-round. The main house was larger than Susannah expected, a 2-story structure with a wide porch and several outbuildings scattered around it. Everything looked worn but cared for, the mark of someone determined to make something lasting from limited resources. Nathan helped her down from the wagon, then carried her trunk toward the house. "Your quarters are upstairs, 2 rooms with a good lock on the door. I sleep downstairs, and there is a bell pull if you ever need anything or feel unsafe. I want you to understand that you have my word, my honor, that I will never do anything to harm or take advantage of you." She believed him, which surprised her. Perhaps she was a fool, but something in his steady gaze and straightforward manner inspired trust. He showed her through the house, pointing out the kitchen, the sitting room, the small office where he kept his accounts. Upstairs, her quarters consisted of a bedroom and a small sitting area, simply furnished but clean and comfortable. The window looked out over the valley, offering a view so spectacular that Susannah caught her breath. "It is beautiful," she whispered. "It is home," Nathan replied, "or it will be eventually. For now, it is just potential waiting to be realized." He set her trunk down by the bed. "Get settled in. Dinner is in an hour. Nothing fancy, I am afraid. My cooking skills are limited but adequate." After he left, closing the door quietly behind him, Susannah sat on the bed and let herself process everything that had happened. She was here, on a ranch in the middle of the Mojave Desert, working for a man who had shown her more kindness in a week than most people had in her entire life. It felt surreal, like a dream she might wake from at any moment. But the bed was solid beneath her, the desert breeze real as it drifted through the window, carrying the scent of sage and possibility. This was happening. This was real. She unpacked her few belongings, hanging her dresses in the small wardrobe and arranging her brush and mirror on the simple dresser. When she caught sight of herself in the mirror, she realized she was smiling, genuinely smiling for the first time in years. Dinner was indeed simple, beans and bacon with cornbread and coffee, but it tasted better than any meal she could remember. They ate at a rough wooden table in the kitchen, and Nathan explained her duties and the daily routine of ranch life. She would help with the animals, assist in building projects, maintain the garden, handle whatever needed doing. In return, she would receive $15 a month, room and board, and Sundays off to rest or do as she pleased. $15 is more than I was making at the store, she protested. That seems too generous. You will earn every penny, Nathan assured her. Ranch work is not easy, especially out here where the desert tries to kill everything that grows, but I believe in fair compensation. A worker should be able to save money, plan for the future, not just survive hand to mouth. Over the following weeks, Susannah learned the truth of his words. The work was brutal, particularly for someone unaccustomed to it. She rose before dawn to help feed the handful of horses and cattle Nathan had acquired, hauled water, mended fences, assisted with construction projects under the merciless desert sun. Her hands blistered and bled, her muscles screamed in protest, and she fell into bed each night so exhausted she barely managed to remove her boots. But Nathan worked beside her every step of the way, never asking her to do anything he would not do himself. He was patient when she made mistakes, encouraging when she struggled, genuinely pleased when she succeeded. He taught her to ride, sitting behind her on a gentle mare until she got the feel of it, his hand steadying her waist when she threatened to slide off. "You are doing great," he said as she managed to guide the horse around the corral without assistance. "A natural horsewoman." "A natural disaster, you mean," she replied, but she was grinning despite her nerves. "Everyone looks awkward when they are learning something new," Nathan said. "The difference is that you keep trying instead of giving up. That takes courage." Slowly, imperceptibly, something shifted between them. The careful politeness of employer and employee gave way to the easy companionship of friends. They talked while they worked, sharing stories of their pasts and dreams for the future. Nathan told her about growing up on a ranch in Colorado, how his parents had lost everything in a drought, and he had spent 10 years working cattle drive to save enough money to try again on his own. "I want to build something that lasts," he explained one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the desert in shades of gold and crimson. "Something that will still be here long after I am gone. Does that sound foolish?" "No," Susannah said softly. "It sounds hopeful." Hopeful is never foolish. She told him about Sacramento, about her parents who had loved her despite her unusual height, how her mother used to say that God made some people tall so they could reach the stars more easily. How lost she had felt after they died, how alone. "I spent 3 years in Mojave feeling invisible and hypervisible at the same time," she admitted. "People stared at me constantly, but no one actually saw me. No one cared who I was beyond my height." "I see you," Nathan said quietly. "I see a woman who is strong and brave and kind, who works harder than most men I have known and never complains. I see someone I am grateful to have in my life." The words settled into her heart like seeds in fertile soil, taking root and beginning to grow into something she was afraid to name. As spring turned to summer, the ranch began to take shape. They completed the corral, planted a substantial vegetable garden, purchased more cattle from a rancher willing to sell at a fair price. Nathan hired 2 men from Mojave to help build a new barn, and Susannah found grim satisfaction in the way their eyes widened when they saw her working alongside Nathan, hauling timber and driving nails with competent efficiency. "That is his ranch hand," one of them muttered, not quite quietly enough. "A woman. That woman does more work before breakfast than you do all day," Nathan said sharply. "If you have a problem with who I employ, you are welcome to leave." They stayed, but they were not friendly. Susannah tried not to let it bother her, but old wounds never fully healed, and their sideways glances and whispered comments scraped at her hard-won confidence. She was carrying water from the well one afternoon when she overheard them talking behind the barn. "Still say it is strange," the first man said. "Unmarried man and woman living out here alone, not proper. You think they are." The second man made a crude gesture. "Would not surprise me. What other man would have her?" "Probably grateful for whatever she can get, even if it is just a temporary arrangement." Susannah's hands tightened on the water buckets. She should walk away, should ignore them, but the words struck too close to her own secret fears. What was she doing here? What did Nathan really want from her? She had been so desperate for kindness that she had not asked the hard questions, had not protected herself the way a sensible woman should. That night, she was quiet during dinner, responding to Nathan's conversation with single-word answers and avoiding his eyes. "Something wrong?" he finally asked, setting down his fork. "Why did you bring me here?" The question burst out of her before she could stop it. "Really? What do you want from me?" Nathan sat back in his chair, his expression unreadable. "I told you I needed help with the ranch. You could have hired a man." "2 men for what you are paying me. You did not need someone like me." "Someone like you," Nathan repeated slowly. "You mean someone capable, reliable, and willing to work hard. You are right, I suppose. I could have hired other people, but I did not want other people. I wanted you." The words hung in the air between them, loaded with meaning. Susannah felt her heart hammering against her ribs. "I have been accused of compromising you," she said bluntly. "Of being your mistress in exchange for room and board. People in town are talking." "People always talk," Nathan said, his voice hardening. "Especially small-minded people with nothing better to do. Is that what you think? That I brought you here to take advantage of you?" "I do not know what to think," Susannah admitted. "I do not understand why you are so kind to me." "No one is ever kind to me without wanting something in return." Nathan stood and walked to the window, staring out at the darkening desert. When he spoke again, his voice was softer, almost sad. My mother was a tall woman, he said. Not as tall as you, but tall enough that people commented. My father loved her desperately, but she spent her whole life trying to make herself smaller, quieter, less noticeable. She hunched her shoulders, wore flat shoes, apologized for taking up space. It broke my heart watching her diminish herself trying to fit into a world that saw her as wrong. He turned to face Susannah, and she was startled to see tears in his eyes. When I saw you in that store, folding yourself down to accommodate everyone's expectations, I saw my mother. I thought about all the times I wished someone had told her she was perfect exactly as she was, that she did not need to change or shrink or apologize. So I offered you a job because I needed help, yes, but also because I wanted to give you what no one ever gave her, a chance to just be yourself. Susannah felt her own eyes filling with tears. I am sorry. I should not have doubted you. You have every right to doubt, Nathan said, returning to his seat. The world has not given you many reasons to trust. But I hope, in time, you will come to understand that my respect and friendship are freely given, with no expectations or conditions. You do not owe me anything beyond honest work, which you have provided tenfold. They finished dinner in thoughtful silence, the air between them changed by the confession. That night, lying in bed, Susannah replayed his words over and over. He had seen her pain because he understood it, had lived adjacent to it through someone he loved. The kindness he showed her was not pity or manipulation, but genuine compassion born from experience. For the first time since coming to the ranch, she let herself acknowledge the feelings that had been growing steadily in her heart. She was falling in love with Nathan Mitchell, with his quiet strength and gentle humor, with the way he treated her as an equal and never made her feel like less than she was. It was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure, and she had no idea what to do about it. Summer heat settled over the desert like a heavy blanket, making work almost unbearable during the midday hours. They adjusted their schedule, rising even earlier to accomplish what they could before the sun turned vicious, then resting during the worst of the afternoon heat and working again in the evening when temperatures became tolerable. It was during one of these afternoon rest periods that Susannah discovered Nathan could play the guitar. She had come downstairs for a drink of water and found him sitting in the parlor, his fingers moving over the strings with surprising grace, coaxing out a melody that was both melancholy and beautiful. He looked up when she entered, his hand stilling on the instrument. "Sorry, I did not mean to disturb you." "You did not," she assured him. "I did not know you played." "Picked it up on cattle drives," he said with a slight shrug. "Long nights with nothing to do but stare at stars and make music. I am not very good. It sounded beautiful to me." She sat in the chair across from him, tucking her skirt around her legs. "Would you play more?" He smiled and began again, this time humming along with the melody. His voice was rough but pleasant, and Susannah found herself relaxing into the music, letting it wash over her like cool water. When he finished, she applauded softly. "That was lovely, thank you, my pleasure." He set the guitar aside carefully. "It has been a while since I had an audience. Gets lonely out here sometimes, even with company." "Do you regret it?" Susannah asked. "Choosing this life instead of staying in town, being around people more?" "Never," Nathan said firmly. "I would rather be lonely occasionally than surrounded by people who make me feel alone." "Does that make sense?" "Perfect sense," she whispered. They sat together in companionable silence, listening to the wind whisper through the eaves and the distant call of a hawk hunting in the cooler air. Susannah felt a contentment she had never experienced before, a sense of being exactly where she belonged. "Can I ask you something personal?" Nathan said suddenly. "Of course. Why did you never marry? I know the obvious answer is your height, but I suspect there is more to it than that." Susannah considered the question carefully. "There was someone once, back in Sacramento before my parents died. His name was Robert, and he was a clerk in my father's office. We courted for nearly 6 months, and I thought he genuinely cared for me. Then one night I overheard him talking to his friends. He said he was courting me because my father had money and connections, that he could overlook my unfortunate appearance for the right price. What did you do?" I told him I never wanted to see him again. He acted surprised, said I was being overly sensitive, that it was just men talking. But I knew the truth. He found me repulsive and was willing to tolerate me for financial gain. After my parents died and the money was gone, he married someone else within 3 months, someone short and pretty and acceptable. He was a fool," Nathan said vehemently. "A shallow, mercenary fool who did not deserve you." "Perhaps," Susannah agreed, "but it taught me something important. It taught me that I would rather be alone than settle for someone who saw me as something to be endured. I decided if I could not have genuine affection, I would have independence instead. It is not what society wants for women, but it is what I chose for myself." "That took courage," Nathan observed. "Most people choose security over authenticity. Most people have more options than I did. Maybe. Or maybe you are just braver than most." The conversation drifted to other topics, but Susannah found herself thinking about his words long after they had gone back to work. Brave. No one had ever called her brave before. Stubborn, yes. Difficult, certainly. But never brave. As summer progressed, they fell into rhythms that felt almost domestic. Susannah took over most of the cooking, discovering she had a talent for making appetizing meals from limited ingredients. Nathan taught her to shoot, setting up targets behind the barn and patiently correcting her stance until she could hit a can at 20 paces. They worked side by side on projects large and small, and Susannah found herself unconsciously noting the way his muscles moved beneath his shirt, the way sweat dampened his hair and made it curl slightly at his neck. She was careful not to let him see her looking, not to reveal the depth of her growing feelings. He had given her friendship and respect, a home and a purpose. She would not jeopardize that by imposing romantic feelings he might not return. But sometimes, she caught him watching her with an expression she could not quite decipher. Something warm and wondering, as if he was seeing something that surprised and pleased him. Those moments made her heart race and her hands shake, made her dream impossible dreams in the quiet darkness of her room. It was late August when the accident happened. They were repairing the barn roof, a task made dangerous by heat-softened shingles and the constant desert wind. Susannah was handing tools up to Nathan when her foot slipped on the ladder. She grabbed for the roof edge but missed, and suddenly she was falling, the ground rushing up to meet her with terrifying speed. Strong arms caught her before she hit, breaking her fall and pulling her against a solid chest. Nathan had jumped from the roof, a drop of at least 10 feet, to catch her. They landed hard, Nathan taking the brunt of the impact, and for a long moment they lay tangled together in the dust, both struggling to catch their breath. "Are you hurt?" Nathan demanded, his hands running over her arms and legs, checking for injuries. "I am fine," she gasped. "But you just jumped off a roof. You could have been killed, so could you?" His face was pale beneath its tan, his eyes wide with fear that was only now beginning to fade. "When I saw you falling, I did not think. I just moved." Susannah became suddenly aware of their position, of how tightly he was holding her, of the way their faces were inches apart. She could feel his heart pounding against her chest, could see flecks of gold in his brown eyes that she had never noticed before. "You saved me," she whispered. Always, he replied, and there was something in his voice that made her breath catch. I will always save you if I can. Neither of them moved. The moment stretched out, heavy with possibility and uncertainty. Susannah saw Nathan's gaze drop to her lips, saw him lean incrementally closer, and her eyes began to drift closed in anticipation. Then he released her abruptly and stood, offering his hand to help her up. The moment shattered like glass, leaving Susannah dizzy with disappointment and confusion. We should call it a day, Nathan said, his voice rough. That was too close. We can finish the roof tomorrow when we are both less shaken. He walked away before she could respond, leaving her standing alone beside the barn with her heart in her throat. That night, Susannah could not sleep. She kept replaying the moment, the almost kiss that had felt so certain and then vanished like a mirage. Had she imagined the heat in his eyes? Had she misread his intentions? Or had he pulled away because he realized in that moment of closeness that he did not want her the way she wanted him? The uncertainty was agonizing. She had been so careful to guard her heart, but somewhere along the way, Nathan had slipped past her defenses and taken up permanent residence. She loved him, fully and completely, and if he did not feel the same way, she did not know how she would survive the daily torture of being so close to something she could never have. She was still awake when she heard footsteps on the stairs, followed by a soft knock on her door. Susannah. Are you awake? She sat up quickly, pulling a shawl around her shoulders over her nightgown. Yes, is something wrong? Can I come in? I need to talk to you. Her hands shook as she lit the bedside lamp and opened the door. Nathan stood in the hallway, his hair disheveled as if he had been running his hands through it, still wearing the same clothes from earlier. I cannot sleep, he said without preamble. I have been downstairs for hours trying to find the right words, and I finally realized there are no right words. There is just the truth. What truth? Susannah asked, her voice barely audible. That I am in love with you. The words tumbled out in a rush, as if he had been holding them back for so long that they exploded of their own accord. I have been in love with you since the first moment you straightened up to your full height in that store. And I saw how beautiful you are, how strong and capable and remarkable. I brought you here telling myself it was just about the ranch, just about giving you a fair chance, but I was lying to myself. I wanted you here because I could not stand the thought of never seeing you again. Susannah stared at him, certain she must be dreaming. This could not be real. Men like Nathan did not fall in love with women like her. I pulled away earlier because I was terrified, Nathan continued, the words pouring out now like water from a broken dam. Terrified that you did not feel the same way, that I would ruin the friendship we have built, that I would make you uncomfortable and drive you away. But pretending I do not feel this way is killing me. So I am here, telling you the truth and hoping against hope that maybe, possibly, you might feel even a fraction of what I feel for you. I love you, Susannah said, her voice cracking with emotion. I have loved you for months, and I was so afraid to say anything because I thought you could never want someone like me. Someone too tall and too plain and too everything wrong. You are not too anything, Nathan said fiercely, stepping into the room and taking her hands in his. You are exactly perfect. You fit perfectly against my heart, Susannah. You always have. He pulled her close, and this time there was no hesitation, no pulling away. His lips met hers in a kiss that was tender and passionate and full of months of restrained longing. Susannah melted into him, her arms wrapping around his neck as she kissed him back with everything she had been holding inside. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Nathan rested his forehead against hers. Marry me, he whispered. Not because society demands it, not because we live under the same roof, but because I cannot imagine spending my life with anyone else. Marry me and be my partner in every sense of the word. Help me build this ranch into something magnificent. Grow old with me here in the desert. Say yes." "Yes," Susannah said, laughing and crying at the same time. "Yes, 1,000 times yes." They were married 3 weeks later in the small church in Mojave, with only the minister and his wife as witnesses. Susannah wore a new dress, pale yellow calico that Nathan had surprised her with, and she stood at her full height beside him, radiating happiness. Catherine and her cronies were in the church, having come to gawk at the spectacle of the too tall woman marrying the handsome rancher. Susannah saw them whispering behind their hands, saw the envy and disbelief on their faces, and found she did not care at all. Let them whisper. Let them judge. She had found something they might never know, genuine love with someone who saw her as perfect exactly as she was. The reception was held at the ranch, a simple affair with food prepared by a few neighboring ranchers' wives who had heard about the wedding and wanted to welcome Susannah properly to the community. She was surprised and touched by their kindness, by the way they treated her with genuine warmth rather than mockery. "We need more strong women out here," one woman named Martha said, clasping Susannah's hands warmly. "The desert does not care if you are tall or short, pretty or plain. It only cares if you are tough enough to survive it. You are clearly tough enough." That night, alone in the room they now shared, Nathan held Susannah close and whispered all the things he loved about her. Her strength, her determination, her kindness, the way she hummed while she worked, the fierce intelligence in her eyes, the sound of her laugh. "Your height," he added, kissing her forehead, "because it means you fit perfectly in my arms, perfectly against my heart. When I hold you, everything aligns just right. We match, Susannah. In every way that matters, we match." "I spent my whole life thinking I was wrong," Susannah said softly, her fingers tracing patterns on his chest. "Too much of all the things I should not be, but with you, I finally feel right. I finally feel like I belong." "You do belong," Nathan assured her. "Here with me, building our future together. You belong exactly here." Their first year of marriage was not easy. The desert remained harsh and unforgiving, testing them with drought and dust storms and equipment that broke at the worst possible moments. But they faced every challenge together, partners in truth as well as name. The ranch grew slowly but steadily, their herd expanding, their land becoming more productive. Susannah discovered she had a gift for animal husbandry, a gentle touch that made even the most skittish horses calm under her care. Nathan built her a larger barn and began acquiring horses specifically for her to train and sell, recognizing that her skills could provide a valuable secondary income. Their second year brought the first real prosperity, enough profit from cattle sales to make improvements to the house and hire 2 permanent ranch hands, a father and son from Mexico who treated Susannah with respectful courtesy and never once commented on her height. Their third year brought their first child, a son they named Henry after Nathan's father. Susannah's pregnancy had been difficult, her tall frame making the weight distribution awkward. But she endured it with the same stubborn determination she brought to everything else. When Henry was born, healthy and squalling, Nathan wept with joy and relief. "He is perfect," he said, holding the tiny bundle with hands made gentle by love. "Look at him, Susannah. We made something perfect." "We did," she agreed, exhausted and euphoric in equal measure. "We really did." Henry grew quickly, a sturdy boy with his father's dark hair and his mother's green eyes. He was followed 2 years later by a daughter they named Clara, after Susannah's mother. Then another son, Thomas, and finally another daughter, Elizabeth. The house that had once seemed so empty filled with noise and laughter, with children's voices and the organized chaos of family life. Susannah's height, which had once been a source of shame, became an advantage as a mother. She could spot her children anywhere on the ranch, could reach things other mothers needed stools for, could carry 2 children at once when necessary. Her strength, once considered unfeminine, allowed her to work alongside Nathan even while raising their family, to be a full partner in both the ranch and their home. The children grew up knowing their mother was different from other women, taller and stronger and more capable of physical labor than most men. But they also grew up knowing she was loved, deeply and genuinely, by a man who treated her as an equal and a treasure. They never learned to be ashamed of her differences because their father taught them to celebrate them instead. "Your mother," Nathan told them countless times, "is the strongest, bravest, most remarkable person I have ever known. You are lucky to have her." And they believed him, because they could see the truth of it in every interaction, in every glance exchanged between their parents, in the way their father's eyes lit up when their mother entered a room even after 15 years of marriage. The ranch prospered beyond their initial dreams. Susannah's horse training program became regionally famous, with buyers coming from as far as Los Angeles and San Francisco to purchase animals trained by the tall woman of Mojave. What had once been whispered as mockery became spoken with respect, and Susannah found a fierce satisfaction in having transformed her greatest source of shame into her greatest professional success. Nathan expanded the cattle operation, acquiring more land and building the lasting legacy he had dreamed of. But he always made clear that the ranch was not his alone, that every success was shared equally with Susannah, that her contributions were just as vital as his own. On their 20th anniversary, Nathan took Susannah back to the spot where they had first kissed, behind the barn where she had fallen and he had caught her. "You remember that day?" he asked, pulling her close. "Every detail," she replied. "I thought I was going to die, and then I thought I was going to die of disappointment when you pulled away." "Worst decision I ever made," Nathan said with a laugh, "but I corrected it soon enough." He grew serious, his hands cupping her face tenderly. 20 years, Susannah. 20 years of waking up beside you, of building this life with you, of watching you be an amazing mother and partner. And I love you more now than I did on our wedding day. I did not think that was possible, but it is. "I love you too," Susannah said, tears streaming down her face. "You gave me everything I thought I could never have. A home, a family, respect, purpose. But most importantly, you gave me love. Real, genuine love that never wavers or diminishes. You made me believe I was worthy of good things." "You were always worthy," Nathan insisted. "You just needed someone to see it clearly enough to show you." Their children grew and eventually left the ranch, pursuing their own dreams while carrying the lessons their parents had taught them about resilience, equality, and the power of genuine love. Henry became a veterinarian, Clara a teacher, Thomas took over a neighboring ranch, and Elizabeth became a lawyer, one of the first women to practice law in California. They all came home regularly, bringing spouses and eventually children of their own. The ranch house rang with the noise of grandchildren running through rooms, of family dinners that lasted hours, of stories told and retold until they became legend. "Tell us about when Grandma fell off the barn," the grandchildren would beg, and Nathan would recount the story, embellishing it slightly each time while Susannah laughed and protested his exaggerations. "Tell us about when you first met," they would demand, and Susannah would describe walking into Henderson's general store, being told to stand up straight by a man who saw her as perfect rather than peculiar. The years passed, kind to them in most ways. They grew older together, their hair turning gray, their movements slowing slightly, but their love never diminishing. They still worked the ranch together well into their 60s, still rode out to check fences and move cattle, still sat on the porch in the evenings watching the desert sunset paint the sky in colors too beautiful for words. On the morning of their 50th anniversary, their children and grandchildren gathered at the ranch for a massive celebration. 3 generations of family they had built together, proof of the love that had started with a simple kindness in a general store. Nathan stood to give a toast, his voice still strong despite his 74 years. 50 years ago, I married the love of my life. People thought we were an odd match, the tall woman and the rancher, but what they did not understand is that we were never odd, we were perfect. 2 people who fit together in all the ways that matter. He turned to Susannah, his eyes still full of the same warmth and wonder they had held decades ago. You have been my partner, my best friend, my greatest adventure. You have made every single day better just by being in it. I thank God every morning that you walked into that store, that you took a chance on a stranger with nothing but a dream and a patch of desert. I love you, Susannah Mitchell. I always have, and I always will. Susannah stood and embraced him, not caring that everyone was watching, not caring about anything except this man who had given her the world. I love you too, she whispered against his chest, fitting perfectly against his heart just as she always had. Thank you for seeing me when I was invisible. Thank you for loving me when I thought I was unlovable. Thank you for every single day of the last 50 years. The party continued late into the night, but eventually everyone dispersed to guest rooms and tents set up around the property. Nathan and Susannah retired to their room, the same room where he had proposed all those years ago, and lay together in the darkness. Are you happy? Nathan asked softly. More than I ever dreamed possible, Susannah replied. You gave me everything, Nathan, everything I never dared hope for. You gave me just as much, he insisted. You made this ranch a home. You gave me a family, a purpose beyond just survival. You showed me what it means to truly partner with someone, to build something together that is greater than either of us could have created alone. They fell asleep in each other's arms, the same way they had fallen asleep thousands of times before. 2 people who had been mocked and dismissed by a cruel world but who had found in each other a love that transcended all judgment. The ranch continued for many more years, eventually passed down to Thomas and his family to maintain and expand. But everyone who knew the story understood that the ranch was more than just land and cattle and buildings. It was a testament to what 2 people could build when they believed in each other, when they refused to let the world define their worth, when they chose love over fear and partnership over loneliness. Nathan and Susannah Mitchell lived into their 80s, still sharp-minded and stubborn, still devoted to each other with a constancy that amazed everyone who knew them. They passed within months of each other. First Susannah from pneumonia during a particularly harsh winter, then Nathan from what the doctor called heart failure, but what everyone knew was simply a broken heart that could not survive without its other half. They were buried together in the small cemetery overlooking the valley, their graves marked with a simple stone that read, Nathan and Susannah Mitchell, partners in love, life, and legacy. Their children and grandchildren continued to gather at the ranch every year on their anniversary, keeping alive the story of the tall woman who was mocked for her height and the cowboy who told her she fit perfectly against his heart. It became a family legend, passed down through generations, a reminder that love has nothing to do with meeting society's expectations, and everything to do with finding someone who sees your true worth. The ranch prospered for another century, growing and changing with the times, but always maintaining the original house where Nathan and Susannah had built their life together. It became a historical landmark eventually, the Mitchell Ranch, famous not just for its successful operation, but for the love story that had founded it. Tourists would come to see the place where the legendary couple had lived and worked, where they had defied conventions and built something lasting. The tall woman and the cowboy who loved her became part of California history, their story told in books and documentaries, their legacy far outlasting the brief time they had walked the earth. But for those who had known them personally, who had seen them work side by side under the merciless desert sun, who had witnessed the way they looked at each other even after decades of marriage, the real legacy was simpler and more profound. It was the understanding that true love requires seeing past surface judgments to the remarkable person underneath, that the right partner makes you feel complete rather than insufficient, that everyone deserves to be loved for exactly who they are rather than who society says they should be. Susannah had spent the first 23 years of her life being told she was wrong, too tall, too strong, too different to ever be truly loved. And then Nathan Mitchell had walked into that general store and proven every cruel voice wrong. He had given her not just love, but the freedom to be fully herself, to stand at her full height without apology, to take up space in the world without shame. In return, she had given him a partner who matched his strength and determination, who shared his vision and helped him build something that outlasted them both, who loved him with the fierce devotion of someone who knew exactly how precious such love truly was. Their story became a beacon for others who felt too different, too much, too wrong for the world they inhabited. It proved that somewhere out there, for everyone, there might be someone who sees not flaws but features, not problems but possibilities, not something to be fixed but something to be cherished exactly as it is. The desert wind still blows across the Mitchell Ranch, whispering through the sage and the Joshua trees, carrying echoes of laughter and love that once filled those spaces. The buildings stand strong, maintained lovingly by descendants who understand that they are guardians not just of property but of proof that love, real love, can overcome any obstacle and outlast any hardship. And sometimes, on anniversary nights when the moon is full and the desert is quiet, people swear they can see two figures on the porch, a tall woman and the man who loved her, sitting close together and watching the stars come out over the land they built together, fitting perfectly against each other's hearts for all eternity.